Hey guys, it's Frederik of the FWX podcast, and in this episode, we're going to talk about an iconic character from the 20th century and the 21st century. And for that, I'm gonna lower myself. I'm gonna tease you guys with some pictures right here. So I'm right here. We're going to be talking about James Bond, and specifically the one you see the most in these pictures, Daniel Craig's James Bond. And we'll do that in a moment. We're gonna have to go back to me for a sec. So we'll talk about James Bond. We'll talk about his origins, who he is, what the story is, because there have been many different James Bond actors and movies, and originally also books. And I'm gonna talk about the most recent ones because there's a cohesive story being told over the Daniel Craig movies with James Bond, and we'll do that in a moment. But first, I would like to inform you that you can like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel. That really helps out the podcast and this channel as well, and also my other podcast if you want to. And you can check those out if you want to. But also, this really helps with launching the podcast as further as it can, because especially in this case, I talk a lot about story elements when it comes to character building, world building. Talk a lot about uh, different franchises, different movies. Talk a lot about action. I talk about those different genres as well. You can find a lot of those things here on the channel and on the podcast. And then also you can share this with friends and family. You can also share this with your friends at your work, your colleagues. Also, you could do that just here online. You can comment in the comment section down below. And I do advise you to keep it friendly and kind. And finally, before I begin here, I'm not a natural English speaker, so if I get something wrong, if I mispronounce something, or if I lose my train of thought, know that that is completely human and that it can happen to anyone. So if those things happen, you should know that I'm not perfect. Nobody is, and I will also do my best to correct myself in that case. All right, let's start this. Let's talk about James Bond specifically when it comes to Daniel Craig. Okay, so I'm getting a bit lower here, but big enough so you can find me. Okay, so like I said, we're going to talk about the most recent movies, but I first want to touch on the very origins of it. And of course, as you see, all the different movie versions of him, all the different actors that played him before. We're going to get into the origins. And I have to start, of course, with the creator of the character and originally the books. So, Ian Fleming was a Brit who wrote those books originally, and he lived in the very early 20th century up until 1964. And he died at the age of 56 in Kent. And so when he was older, he wrote the series of books of the James. I'm gonna rephrase. When he was older, he wrote the James Bond novels after working for the British Naval Intelligence Division during the Second World War. That's directly from the Wikipedia of Ian Fleming. He was involved with intelligence in that level, and so he drew a lot from his portfolio as an intelligence analyst and officer to make his books. And he started in 52 writing Casino Royale. That's the very first book that he made. And years went by, he had a kid with his wife and Shatris. We married that same year in 52. And so he's is also from Wikipedia. In '08, the Times ranked Fleming as the 14th on the list of the 50th greatest British writers since 1945. So Fleming, after his life as an intelligence analyst and officer, wrote those books, and he made a lot of them. I want to check for a moment just how many Bond books there are. Oh, here it is. He wrote 12 novels and two collections of short stories in the series while he lived at his Jamaican home, Golden. And there's other versions too, by the way, that have been made in previous years. And there's a reason why I want to bring up anything recent, because one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode is because currently they are in the selection of. I'll rephrase for another moment. Momentarily, they are working on a new slate of James Bond films, and they're in the selection for the actor that's gonna play him. I know one person at the top of the list is Mr. Callum Turner, the future Mr. Alipa, and he's at the top of the list along with a couple of others. And also, interestingly, for the future, there's a game about to come out. 007 First Light is going to come out in a few months. I believe it's for May. I may be mistaken. By the way, guys, if I am mistaken about something, please point down below. And also tell me how excited are you for a new James Bond game, by the way. Also, part of that is part of the reason that I asked this is because I used to be a gamer myself as well. I wasn't into putting that online, walkthroughs and live playthroughs and all of those. But as a fan of the franchise of James Bond and looking at everything that has been done with his name and vice and other stuff as well, it's an interesting thing to look at. Also, this game is being made by the studios that have made the previous Hitman games, which is also very cool. Because that means that we're about to get some very interesting social aspects in this as well. It won't just be a hit punch shoot game, but there will be a lot of that too, of course. Okay, let's continue here with. Let's get into the lore here. So, let's talk about the man himself. Back here to the top. So, like I said, there's been many people that have played James Bond. So, here in the creation and inspiration. So, James Bond is an intelligence officer in the Secret Intelligence Service, better known as MI6, and he goes by the code number 007, and he used to be before a Royal Navy Reserve commander. And he is, of course, based upon the experience that Ian Fleming himself had back when he was doing that. Although it said here it wasn't just about what Fleming did, but the people around him did. Was a compound of all the secret agents and commando types I met during the war. Direct quote from Ian Fleming himself. So there have been, here's a good list of people that portrayed him. This is in no clear order, but I'll say the names for a moment. So there's Toby Stevens, who played him. Oh, hold up. I'm getting things wrong here. He didn't play Bond. My bad. Let me get that right for a moment. The novels. Actually, let's get into the novels. Because there's also lots of the lore in there as well, of course. But I said the main thing already, which is that Bond is an intelligence officer in the 00 section of MI6, and he goes through a bunch of experiences and missions that he goes on. And oftentimes, these books that Fleming wrote are also the name of the missions, starting with Casino Royale. And then there's a few others that aren't in that recent slate of movies of Daniel Craig. There's Live and Let Die. There is also Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever, From Russia with Love, Doctor No, Goldfinger, For Your Eyes Only, Thunderball, The Spy Who Loved Me, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, You Only Live Twice, The Man with the Golden Gun, Octopussy in the Living Daylights, two separate ones. And then there's a bunch of his short stories, which includes some of those that I just said. Okay, but let's actually talk about the movies now. So, there have been many portrayals of Bond. Here we go. So, people that definitely played him. Let's start from the more recent to the old. So, the ones I'm going to talk about were with Daniel Craig being Bond. Then, previously to that, we had Pierce Brosnan. We also had Sean Connery and Roger Moore. You can see all these pictures right here. Timothy Dalton, George Lazenby played him. David Niven, Barry Nelson, and George Hilton. Those are all the actors that played Bond in all the different versions of him from the time that they started making the movies. Yes, those are 9. Okay, let's get into stuff here. So, I'm gonna read the. So, let's start with the first one then. Casino Royale from 2006. So, this is the very beginning, as Casino Royale originally was, like I said previously, the first Bond book, and also this reboot where Daniel Craig plays the version. So we get to see in the pre-credits how he got his 00 status, which is tracking down someone who. Let's actually see if I can get into those pictures, by the way. Those first scenes with him, this is a prevalent one. I'm gonna get into it for just a bit more, because I get the this is the version of the list. I wanna talk just previous moments, because we get like a prologue and a pre credits stuff. So I'm gonna talk about that. So we see Bond getting promoted to his double O agent status because he has taken out a section chief of the MI6 called Dryden, and Dryden's contact in Prague, where Bond has taken him out because he was selling secrets to another player. Okay, let's get back into it here. So, after the pre-credits, Bond Bond tracks down a bomb maker in Madagascar. We get a very good action scene, a lot of free running, and we also get to see how Bond works. So, in many ways, he is. You know what? I'll just go over the stories. I'll talk about what Bond is like afterwards. So, we get those scenes where he has the free running, the action, finally catches up to the bomb maker with his mobile phone, and he looks through the phone, in which he discovers a message tracing it back to Alex Dimitrios, and then further to Le Chiffre, one of the most well-known Bond villains. And Le Chiffre is someone who short sells stock into successful companies, and then he engineers terrorist attacks to sink the share prices. That leads Bond to Miami, where he foils one of those plans to destroy a prototype Skyfleet airliner, which is in the movie the biggest plane of the world at that point. And this uh, pushes Le Chiffre back, and he has to do something to get more money. And that, I'll rephrase. So, because Bond foils that plot in Miami with the prototype Skyfleet airliner plane, in other words, the biggest plane in the world, which results into the Chiffre getting money for himself back. And so he puts up a high stakes poker tournament in Montenegro at the Casino Royale, which is the name of a hotel. And Bond is then inserted into this game where he's supposed to beat Le Chiffre, and he is helped out by one of the what we call Bond girls in the form of Vesper Lind, played by Eva Green. Let's actually get into a picture of her. Here's a good picture of them on the train. Nope, not on the train. That's her in her dress from the night he's supposed to take Le Chiffre out. Let's just get to a photo of her, actually. Proper photo. So she's a Bond girl in the first movie, although later we find out a lot a lot is more wrong with there's something I'm gonna rephrase again. There's something up with her. So that there we go. So Vesperlind is a member of the Treasury Department in the UK, and she is the one that has to give the money from the Treasury so Bond can actually attend this poker tournament. And there's a lot involved here. We get scenes where she actually there's another uh, side plot in here is that part of the money that Le Chiffre is supposed to get is from a couple of scenes earlier at the very beginning of the movie where Le Chiffre has been funding some kind of warlord. I'm assuming in an African country. I'm only assuming, by the way. And he lost that money because of the foil plot with Bond. And so that person, the warlord, and his lead henchmen come after the Chiffre. We get those fight scenes into the movie, which is why they're in there as well. We get those moments, and finally, after a poisoning attempt, by the way, Bond finally beats Le Chiffre at the poker game, which is also very enjoyable to watch in the movie, until finally, not that long after winning, Bond finds out that Vesper has been kidnapped by Le Chiffre, which is a lure to get Bond to drop everything because this time he kind of has been falling in love with her. And we also get to those scenes. I had to me for this. We get those scenes where he is captured himself going after Vesper, of course, and he's captured in the process because they place her in the middle of the road, so he has to crash his car. And luckily, he survives, and then he uh, is taken somewhere. She hurt too, and he gets tortured. We get that famous "I've got an itch" scene with Matt Mikkelsen as Le Chiffre, using a rope with like a heft at one end. Yeah, let's get back to what it, the plot, what happens. That leads to a confrontation as James is rescued, and Le Chiffre is seemingly killed by Mr. White, who had been a liaison between the financier and a number of other clients. And we get those scenes in the movie where uh, James is recuperating after pretty much getting beat up, and they he kind of finds he kind of finds that he indeed did fall in love with Vesper, and they go then on a vacation of sorts. They go to Venice, and in Venice he gets a call from the Swiss bank that his winnings from the poker game actually never repaid back to the British Treasury. And so we get a scene as this is happening where James learns of this and figures out that actually Vesper all this time has been a double agent. Like I said, there was always something going on with her, and that results into James following her, pursuing her into Venice, where he is then attacked by people of Mr. White. Luckily, he survivor. Luckily, he survives, but White gets the money, and Vesper is locked up in some kind of cage as the gunfight exa- exaggerates. I will say there's the other word I wanted to say, but exaggerates also works. and the pants. Sorry, the place is going down into the water between the lagunas in Venice, and finally that leads to her sacrificing herself to save him, although he has difficulty of not trying to save her, which leads to him having to let her go as she drowns. And finally, we get a couple more scenes with him on a boat, dry, uh, sailing away from Venice, where he then is in a phone conversation with his boss, M, played in this movie series by Dame Judy. Dame Judy, I'll just say. And then we get a final scene. We get a final scene with James as he finally hunts down Mr. White and puts a bullet through his kneecap before finally giving you the catchphrase of his. The name is Bond, James Bond. And that's the end of the first movie of Casino Royale. And so, for me personally, Casino Royale is my favorite Bond movie. Though the others are also very good as well, but are, in comparison, a little less. That includes the next one we'll talk about now. So, the next one to talk about here is this one, The Quantum of Solace, which is came out 2 years after Casino Royale in 2008, up against a heavy hitter like Iron Man movie. But this, I would argue, Quantum of Solace is the lesser of the latest Bond movies. But let's talk about what happens here. So, back to the list. So, at the very beginning, James and M interrogate Mr. White regarding the organization that he's beholden to, that is the Quantum Organization. But unfortunately, there has been another double agent here at play. That is the bodyguard of M, a guy named Mitchell. And he attacks M, which enables White to escape. And James goes after Mr. White and his organization. And that leads him to Haiti and a connection to Dominic Green, who is an environmentalist, played in that movie by this gentleman right here, Mathieu Amalric. Hold up, I'm gonna put this away. No longer need it. This is help. Alright. So in Haiti, James discovers a plot between Green and now an exiled general from Bolivia, Medrano. Medrano is played in this movie by this gentleman, Joaquin Coslo. Okay, I'll mention something else in a moment as well. So that leads to, I'll rephrase that for a moment again. So Bond discovers a plot between Green and this Medrano so that the general can be put into power in Bolivia, while Mr. White's organization is giving a monopoly to run the water supply to Bolivia. And Bond discovers that White's organization, Quantum, is damming up the supply of fresh water so they can force the price up. And James gets help from an agent in the Bolivian government there, Camille Montes, played in this movie by Olga Kurilenko, another name you will know. I'll address something at the very end here. But first, I want to get through the movies and their stories. So, with the help of that agents from Bolivia, James attacks the place where Green and Medrano are finalizing the plans, only for Green to turn on Medrano. Nope, that's not what it says here. I'll rephrase another time. So, bunch of action scenes. Uh, Here's the thing: I didn't rewatch Quantum of Solace because it's pretty much considered to be the lesser ones of the movies in the recent, in the recent Bond film series. So I'll just read what exactly is standing here. So again, Bond and Montez attack the hotel where the finalizing of the plans is happening, and Green is left in the desert with only a little bit of engine oil to drink. So we get basically the finale of that movie. And then finally, here's the cohesive part of the story. James finds. Actually, I want to bring up to tie this neatly together something about Vesper here. That there's a thing she wears here in this picture right here. She is wearing some kind of special uh, locket, and in Casino Royale, James figures out what exactly that is, and it's given to somebody that she used to know. And so, one of the agents from Quantum is that former lover of Vesper, Yusuf Kabira. And it says bringing him to justice, but that sounds like killing him. I want to point out here for a moment about Quantum Solace that while we already get introduced to some of the key characters here, like James and M, played by two amazing actors, and then also there's Felix Leiter, who's also a very known figure from the James Bond films, especially uh, that this time in a different color, quite literally, played by the amazing Jeffrey Wright. Then also in this movie, another two very well known actors. David Harbour plays a man named Greg Beam, and Stana Katic plays Corinne Venot. And the reason why I'm saying this is because there used to be. I'm gonna get to me about this actually. Uh, there used to be a TV series that I used to be obsessed by, and that was the series Castle, where Stana Katic played the detective role against a writer, novelist who writes thrillers, and he's played by Nathan Fillion, who is one what I like to call the king of the nerds or kings of nerds because they've been in so many different uh, franchises, whether it's superheroes or sci-fi or a western or some kind. Because that initial show that Fillion did, um, Firefly, is a combination of things, both a western and sci-fi and all of that. So very much seen like that. So Sonic appears in that. I wanted to share that with you guys because it's one of my favorite series of all time. Because it dips into here because Fillion plays Castle, who writes about spies and all of that. So that neatly ties in here as well. Okay. Also, it's a given almost, but I'll say it anyway. Caddick is also a very beautiful actress. Okay, let's get into the next movie. One of the most well known and well played movies, and that is Skyfall. So, Skyfall, just like the first, no, I'll say it differently. So, Skyfall is arguably one of the best James Bond movies. And if I'm not mistaken, that was one that was not written before. Let's get into that actually for a moment. Also, interestingly, about Skyfall, this coincided with the 50th anniversary of the very first James Bond film, Dr. No, in 1962. Okay, let's get back to the pictures here. Okay, so I want to say also here, in preparation for this video, I watched Skyfall and Casino Royale because those are considered to be the two best movies of that recent film series. I would argue that the recent one is also really, really good, but the one thing that pulls it down a little is the length of the movie. But then again, all nearly all James Bond movies are pretty lengthy. Okay, let's continue here. So I think a lot of people here will know what Skyfall is about. I'm gonna go over that pretty quickly here. So it started in Istanbul with Bond and another agent played by Naomi Harris. You'll definitely know who, at that point in the very beginning, James doesn't know her name really, but I will point that out when we get there. And so they're pursuing an unknown assailant, Bond, and there's other agents played by Naomi Harris. Because this guy has stolen or taken uh, files from MI6, which has all the secret identities of NATO agents embedded into other agencies all around the world. And so, in the process of the action sequence that we get, which is amazing throughout Istanbul and just outside of Istanbul, we get to dramatic moments where Harris's character has an opportunity to shoot both the assailants, but also is pretty close to shooting Bond at the same time because it's not a clear shot, and speaks over the microphone, speaks over the connection for the earpieces. Take the bloody shot. And so, unfortunately, Bond gets hit, and he is presumed to be dead as he flows down below into the water as he's fighting on as previously he was fighting on top of a train on a bridge above the water. And so he flows into the water. He luckily survives his ordeal. And I want to mention here songs from the series to get into because this is where we get the one of the most well-known James Bond songs. Here we go. So there's a few that are really, really good from the most recent movies, and of course, it being Skyfall, there is Adele's Skyfall, of course, which is a really good song, and also, if I'm not mistaken, won an Oscar. Yes, it's here at the top of the music thing. Three Bond movie songs have won the Oscar for Best Original Song. That was Skyfall, as I just said. And then it's in the follow-up movie for Skyfall, right, which is Spectre, where Sam Smith did Writings on the Wall. And then finally, of the most recent movie, No Time to Die, done by Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas O'Connell. And I want to say something about him for a second uh, to delve into pop music talk for a moment. I did a breakdown of Phineas's work and his artistry because he's a very underrated artist, and he has a lot of great music himself. And I urge you to go check that out. So you can find that in the plaque above. Okay, let's continue with what Skyfall is about. But I wanted to insert this because those songs are amazing. Okay, so Skyfall. So the process of what happens in that chase with Bond and Naomi Harris's character leads to questions by the government of the UK as they're questioning if M is really that good of a director of the Secret Service or MI6 as we know it, and she becomes the subject of a review of the government over her handling of that situation. And that leads to um, the targeting of her, and her office is blown apart, quite literally. And where Bond is at after trying to recovering from his fall and almost getting killed, he sees this news on CNN, the in-world CNN, where he also have Wolf Blitzer for some reason, and he sees that on the news. And that prompts him to come back, and he's then asked to assist in the investigation. And also, he figures out a lead himself, as there's pieces of whatever is left of the bullet in his chest, and he asks them to figure out what that was. And also, he is sent to Shanghai and Macau, as they're looking for a mercenary named Patrice. Patrice, by the way, is played in that movie by Ola Rapaz. That's this gentleman right here. He's a Swede, interestingly enough. Okay. Where James then obviously kills him. And from the casing that Patrice had with him, James finds out a specific kind of coin. And that leads to him establishing a connection with a witness to that scene. a woman who Séverine, played by Berenice Marlot, beautiful French actress, and that's the next part where so Bond found a mercenary in Shanghai, and the witness, played by that actress, Sevi, played by that actress named Severine in the movie, goes to Macau, and there's the next link in terms of the investigation as well, as James finds in because this Patrice guy had a case with him with a break apart set, like a ghost weapon set for a sniper rifle, basically. And in this package, there was like a special kind of mint, which leads James to Macau in yet another one of those tournament kind of things. And Severin is also in Macau. They have a connection, if you know what I mean, which finally leads her to lead James to the person that has been uh, exposing the agents of MI6 and other agencies around the world, of where any possible NATO agent was embedded in a hostile agency. And so James gets to an island with Severin, where they meet up with Raul Silva, who of course is played by the brilliant Javier Bardem, amazing actor that you will know from many things. Maybe his most famous movie, besides No Country for Old Men, might be this one, Skyfall, if not also in more recent stuff, including also working a lot with his own family, his wife, the incredible Penelope Cruz, and he's been in recent movies like Dune and in the F1 movie, by the way, played a role in that as well. Okay, back to Skyfall. So James goes to that island with Severin, and they meet up with Raul Silva, who looks like a even worse version of Donald Trump. And Raul Silva used to be an MI6 agent himself, but he got captured and tortured by the Chinese secret agency, whatever that one is, in this fictionalized world adapted to the screen in Skyfall. And Silva was already working for M at that time too, all the way back. And so he blames M for the imprisonment by the Chinese secret agency. And so he has put out a plan of exposing all those agents, and that is to ruin M's credibility and reputation. And that leads to his capture on that island, uh, just right after killing Severin, R.I.P. And and so he's brought back to the UK into the new headquarters, as the old headquarters can no longer be used, and into an underground cell for Silva. And James, at one point, realizes that actually this is what Silva wanted all along. And so he figures out another attempt on M's life by Silva as they are in London, and James goes after Silva throughout the London transportation system, the tube, as it's called. And by the way, as that is all happening, we get another interesting lore person from the James Bond franchise, and that is Q, played in this movie by Ben Whishaw, who becomes the new, who becomes that version, and you will definitely know Ben Whishaw from other roles. Most recently in Black Doves and a few other roles. He's in Paddington movies as well, and he shows up in the next couple of movies as well. Okay, to let's continue here. So there's an attempt on M's life again by Silva, who is wearing a policeman's uniform, and he has his own people with him, and they try to get to her at the moment of the review that she is under, that he has forced her in, because his whole plan was to taint her reputation, and so that sets off another goose chase. We get a lot of chases in this franchise, and they're helped out by somebody else who has been cameoing during this movie, another person that becomes really relevant later in the next couple of movies. Sorry, that was the wrong movie. Sorry, Ben. And that other person is a guy from the intelligence overview, uh, a dude named Gareth Mallory, played by the incredible Rafe Fiennes, who's had some extraordinary years the past couple of years in his acting. He's got a ridiculously long name, actually. Rafe Nathaniel Twistleton Wakeham Fiennes. Hope I pronounced that right. It's been a lot of stuff recent couple of years. One of my first ever videos on this channel was about one of those that was Conclave. Uh, you can check that out if you want. Back to where we were. Uh, Fiennes you will also know as Lord Voldemort from the Harry Potter movies, of course. But let's get back to Bond in Skyfall. So, yet another chase. Silva attacks M during that meeting with the oversight people, including Mallory, played by Fiennes, and that leads James to the what's that word again? Yeah, I'll say it differently. So Bond takes M away, and just to save her, despite actually not being that in that best of a condition anymore, following his supposed death at the very beginning of the movie, and so he takes her to insert title movie right here, the place where he grew up, the Skyfall Orphanage in Scotland. And there he is helped by uh, the local manager of the orphanage. That's this gentleman right here, Albert Finney, who plays Kincaid. Yeah, okay. And the three of them uh, do a Home Alone on Silva and his troops. Uh, mature version, of course, a bit more diehard than Home Alone, to be honest, luring Silva into that trap. And while they're very successful at repelling all Silva's men. Unfortunately, in the end, Emmy is killed, which leads to James going back to active duty, where he is now under the command of the new person named M, played by uh, Rafe Fiennes, as Mallory becomes the new M. Okay, that's where Skyfall ends. So, absolute master movie, considered one of the best Bond movies, kind of because the show is stolen by us, especially these two, the supposed dynamic between Daniel Craig and Javier Bardem as Raul Silva, who steal the show. Okay, let's get into the next one, and that is Spectre. And here we get into also a couple of other things about James's background, and also stuff you've seen before if you have seen the old James Bond movies. Okay, so let's get into Spectre. So, following the death of Judy Dench's M, Bond has gotten a message from her following her death that leads him to stop a terrorist attack in Mexico City, and we get those scenes with all the Death Day people as they're clothed into skeletons and the like. But since the new M, Mr. Mallory, played by Ray Fiennes, he didn't really know about that, so he takes Bond back off his active duty. But Bond decides to investigate this anyway because this is an important thing. And that trail leads him back to another interesting place in the world, arguably one of the coolest and most beautiful cities in the world, Rome, where he gets to know, insert movie title, the terrorist organization known as Spectre. And he gets another clue there that leads him to Austria, where he finds Mr. White, who has been poisoned by the people of Spectre, and who's slowly dying because of the poison, of course. And White decides that, well, there's still one more person in my family that needs to be saved from the ills of Spectre, and the connection that White had with uh, the previous from the previous movies, including the Quantum Organization, and this includes about the leadership of Spectre, a man named Franz Oberhauser, and White asks James to protect his daughter, as I said, a woman named Madeleine Swann. I'm saying in the French way because she is played in this movie by a French actress. You will all know that is Léa Seydoux, of course, prominent actress who's going to be in the new Dune movie coming up. We'll also know her from the Inglourious Bastards movie, and she's also in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, another movie I've made video about. Okay, let's continue here. So, following the advice from White to Bond, White commits suicide, shoots himself in the head. Meanwhile, back at home in the UK, Mr. M, this time Mallory, played by Ray Fiennes, has come under pressure because there's a supposed new global intelligence sharing network that has been named Nine Eyes. In other words, to share intelligence. We have a similar kind of name in the real world. I believe that's the Six Eyes. It's a cooperation between all the major English speaking countries to share intelligence in case of terrorist emergencies and stuff like that. Okay. And so there's a different version of that called Nine Eyes in this case. And so James goes to find Madeline Swan, like I said, played by Leia Seydoux, and he tracks Spectre to Morocco with her. And as this is happening, James figures out that these bunch of terrorist attacks that has been happening recently, the organization of Spectre is behind it, which is why that Nine Eyes thing is there, because it would be easier to share intelligence amongst each other. But the truth is that Spectre also controls Nine Eyes, which would give them access to all the intelligence in the world, especially between the English speaking countries. That would be the UK, America, Australia, and New Zealand, and I'm missing a few more. And he gets to James in a meeting where he finds Oberhauser, and we get into a bit more of James's backstory, as it turns out that uh, Bond's father was also the guardian of Franz Oberhauser. No, I'm getting this wrong. I'm gonna rephrase here. So, also, I want to point out at this point who Oberhauser really is, and he's played by the immaculate Christoph Waltz, pretty well known for playing bad guys all around, like in Inglorious Bastards, of course, and in recent stuff as well, or a bit older, like Elite Battle Agent and The Legend of Tarzan, and many more stuff as well. Okay, so I'll try to rephrase what I just said. So, Spectre has found them because there's an installation of Spectre in Morocco. So, Oberhauser, played by Waltz, captures James and Madeline, and he reveals then that after the death of Bond's parents, Oberhauser's father became James's guardian. Yeah, that's how I'm supposed to say it. And Oberhauser initially was jealous because of all the attention and care that James got. And initially, Franz faked his death years ago, also to cover up that he was actually now killing his own father because of the jealousy that he had towards James, played by Mr. Daniel Craig here, of course, man of the beautiful blue eyes. But now, in his transformation, Franz Oberhauser is now known as one of those iconic James Bond villains from the lore, and Stavro Blofeld, and we get a full circle moment where he claims all responsibility for all the suffering that James has been through. A movie. Want to share some more pictures because otherwise it's just me talking to you guys about what's about the text on the screen because otherwise what would be the need, right? Okay, so like I said, let's get back to the script, the what happens. So Stavro Blofeld, played by Waltz, confesses to being the original creator of all the suffering of James in his life. And this is that iconic scene. I actually think I can find that. It's not the scenes you see here from Casino Royale. This is from the scene itself. It's where he gets that drill in his head and something goes wrong. I've never figured out what actually went wrong here because there's a lot of science gobbledygook stuff that Stavro explains myself. Okay, but luckily they escape, go back to London, where James then forces, uh, where James gets back in touch with Mallory and Q so they can shut down Nine Eyes. As I said, that was also being controlled by Spectre, and in the end, they apprehend Blofeld, who has turned the original place of MI6 into his own playhouse. This building right here is turned into his own playhouse with a lot of booby traps and stuff like that. A lot of stuff, explosions and all of that. But finally, in the end, the hero wins in this movie, and Blofeld is apprehended as James chooses to not kill him. And then we finally get into the last movie, which is No Time to Die, the most recent one from 2021. And I'll go back to the interesting stuff with the actors and all when we get to those parts. Okay, so last movie in the Bond Craig franchise series. So it's been literally 5 years since Blofeld's uh, capture, and so now James is living in Jamaica. There's a bunch more scenes that I should add here as we kind of saw, we kind of see what happened with Madeline Swan and her origin, of course, of her father and her mother, because it that gives us the origin of the villain in that movie. But I'll just get to the point here. So, following the capture of Blofeld, and we cut to 5 years later, following those scenes that I should be talking about, of course, which set up the villain of this movie. But I'm trying to go a bit faster here. So James is living in Jamaica, where he gets enlisted back into the help because he has retired since Blofeld's capture. So he gets uh, back into the action with some help from Mr. Felix Leader, played by Jeffrey Wright, of course, and another man, Logan Ash, played by this gentleman, Billy Magnuson, American actor you will know from other stuff like Lilo and Stitch, Roadhouse, Aladdin, most recently. Not most recently, but you know what I mean. So he was in that movie too. And so they go looking for someone from Jim's original country in the UK, a scientist named Valdo Obrushev. And so James decides, okay, let me help you because this time it might actually go well. Which leads them to Cuba, where James is infiltrating a Spectre gathering. Remember the agency from before, from the previous movie, where Blofeld is the head of, despite being in jail in the UK, but somehow is even attending this party. But then also, kind of important and also something to talk about here is one of the people also in this movie, a local act, a local in Cuba, played by the incredible Ana de Armas, was in the movie in a role. You've I've mentioned her before because I've talked about the ballerina John Wick movie. She's been in amazing stuff ever since her breakout. So she plays a side role in that Bond movie in Cuba. Because originally she is one herself a Cuban. Okay, so James gets into the meeting, but actually this has been a trap from the first step that James has set in there, as Blofeld is amazingly attending this through the eye that was taken from him, which is served around on a platter, by the way, crazy enough. And there was a reason why this Obrushev guy was removed, because he was working on a nanoscale weapon, which would involve no use of any real kind of weapon like a gun or a knife or a machine gun or something, which would completely, what would the right word be? You know what? Anyway, what I mean with this is that if a nano weapon could be used, then there's no need for any kind of intelligence or security apparatus or anything like that. Or just kind of like how you think with AI. We're afraid AI might come for us and take our jobs, and it does. So that's a kind of similar analogy here. Okay, that is what I'm talking about. But actually, Obrushev is working for somebody else and has re engineered that weapon so it attacks the members of Spectre. And we get to see those scenes where the nano weapon rips people apart. But James, with help from Paloma, played by Ana de Armas, brings later. I'm gonna rephrase. So, Overchef is captured by James. James pulls him out of there. He brings him to Felix Leiter, played by Jeffrey Wright, throughout this series. And they're on a ship. And the other guy that I talked about, Magnuson, who plays Ash, he betrays the guys and helps Overchef escape via a helicopter and unfortunately kills Felix Leiter. And you get those scenes. There's another great chase sequence with some fighting and shooting, which finally uh, breaks all bonds for James and the CIA, as Leiter was working for the CIA for so long. But then James decides to hang up his retired life and go back to the MI6, where he confronts his old boss, his new old boss, played uh, Mallory, played by Ray Fiennes. And because he was one of the people actually in favor of this nano weapon that is known as Heracles. And what this thing can do is that it's programmed to attack people based on their genetic markers. So it could be deadly anyway. And James decides that he needs to go visit Blofeld because he will know more about all of that. And in the process, he comes back and sees his ex, Madeline, who is actually the therapist for Blofeld while he's in prison. And there's a whole awkward exes thing. We get those borderline funny scenes, but it's more drama than funny. Only there's an altercation that James has with Blofeld. Again, I'll point out he's played by hold up. Just a moment, guys. Here we are, Spectre, where Blofeld is played by Christoph Waltz. That was what I wanted to get to. It took a moment because he's the head of Spectre. But, like I said, as it's also on the text here, James gets into not really a fight, not really in any kind of winning way, but he gets in contact with Blofeld. And we get the reveal that actually James had those Heracles nanobots on him, which then were programmed to kill Blofeld, who effectively is also killed by those nanobots. And that leads to James trying to get back in touch with Madeline and back to her original home, which we see in the prologue of this movie, where we get a almost similar kind of scenes where we get another reveal This I just want to show instead of just say. So it turns out that Madeline, for a good while, has not been living alone anymore. Turns out that in the years that James was away from Madeline, she had been taking care of a daughter, and who has very clear blue eyes, which kind of just gives us an indication that James was a father, is a father at that point. And I want to say that this little actress does what she has to do in this movie incredibly well. It might be little, it might be just a bit of moments that she has in the movie, but she does it well, I have to say. And as this is all happening, these reverse kind of prologue scenes with James coming in touch with Mathilde, Madeline's daughter. She Madeline also tells James about the man that is actually controlling this nanobot weapon, a guy named Lyutsever Safin. And he is played by yet another amazing actor. They will definitely know Mr. Rami Malek, Oscar winner. You will definitely know him as he is the main villain in this movie with his crazy name, Lyutsever Safin. He's a nasty piece of work. Literally what it says right here. And also, just like Blofeld, a bioterrorist with personal vendettas against uh, James, but also Spectre. And one of the things that actually makes him very iconic in this role, actually, here we get it, is his mask from the prologue scenes. There's this creepy mask that we see in the prologue and later on as well. But especially in that prologue, well, what's not to say incredible things about Rami Malek. Man is an amazing actor. And there's also some funny behind the scenes stuff about the accumulation in the making of the movie. In fact, apparently they there's a there's an interview with Malek and Stephen Colbert's show where Malek confirms that actually when they nailed the plots and where everything was going, that the two of them shared a kiss, which is pretty funny if you think about it. I mean, just for the fun of it. I'm not trying to make fun of men kissing other men. Not at all. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying it because these are two beautiful men in real life. And for them to have that moment of like, yeah, we nailed it. It's just a funny thing to me. Okay, so James made it back to Madeline's childhood home. They're followed by Saffron's people, and which includes that Ash Logan guy. And as they're followed, James takes out Ash. But unfortunately, in the process, Safin manages to capture Madeline and Mathilde and brings them to his island where the Heracles nanobots are being made as well, which results into James working with MI6, his new old boss M and Q, as well as they go after Madeline and Mathilde. And the only way to do anything like that is to call in an airstrike, a missile strike from a destroyer of the Royal Navy of the United Kingdom. And we get a ton of action in this as well, as James goes full SWAT style into the building, proving that he's still a badass despite certain things that I'm about to tell him, that I'm about to tell here, which is that James, during his first altercation with Safin, maybe I can even show this for a bit. So a fight breaks out between the two near the end of the movie, as the missile strike is currently uh, one scenes from that fight. I'm gonna have to. Here we go. There's no clear scene, no clear images of the fight itself. But I think if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about here. There is kind of a moment from said fight from the good people at Salon.com. Anyway, so during the fight, Bond and Safin have before this bad guy, actually gets to die, gets killed. He manages to infect James with the nanobots that have been programmed also to attack Madeline and Mathilde. But then we get to the very end of the movie, and James does. Actually, I'm not just gonna read from this. I'm just gonna say them to you. So you have a visual, because it being the end of said film series at that point, there's only one logical way to end it: for the captain to go down with the ship, as James sacrifices himself. Spoiler alert. I probably should have said that from the very beginning, but it does happen. In the end of the Daniel Craig James Bond series, he is killed. In a bit of an overkill, I think. If you are infected to die by nanobot, but then get a missile striked, that sounds like overkill to me. But then again, we get scenes that are very beautiful with him looking out at everything around him as he's on top of the factory, and it's both beautiful and saddening at the same time, because Daniel Craig was such a good Bond, in my opinion. Speaking of, let's now talk about who Bond, despite his backstory and story that we get to see in these movies, actually is. So originally, Bond was written as a typical masculine kind of guy, uh, who liked to punch and fight, who seems to be, uh, in Dutch we have a word for this, a rokkenjager, someone who goes after ladies like they're trash. I'm gonna say that a bit differently. A womanizer, I think, would be the right word. someone who goes after anyone. Uh, Although I've seen my good friends over at Cinema Therapy have explained that there's moments from the older versions of James Bond where it does not happen. Also, I glossed over a moment from Spectre where the Bond girl in that case is more a Bond woman because Monica Bellucci plays an important role there as one of the many Spectre people. And, well, here's actually the other thing about James that's important here. He has a thing for older women that are married, and but is also easily charmed. He's kind of what we would think as any guy as the total package. If you have the fast cars, the beautiful women, if you have the gadgets, if you have the guns and all of that, you must be the epitome of masculinity. But in truth, he's not. That is not what masculinity is. Actually, a good tip for anyone to know if you have to say what kind of person you are, if you as a man need to say, I am a man, I am an alpha, you are not. If you are saying that, you are not a man. And you need to reevaluate what you are and probably go get some therapy. Now, most people here will give this a moment for better help to get in. I'm not going to do that. I'm not one of those people who is constantly making advertisements for other things. I won't do that. I'm just making fun of that for a bit. Um, but that seems to be, I think, the key thing for. And also, this might lead into maybe the new James Bond that we'll see uh, maybe after the game comes out. And I'm also thinking there might be something about the film rights and all of that, because it's been there's been a lot of stuff surrounding the possible new adaptation. Because where do you go from here? Actually, when you've had such an interesting kind of tales about James Bond in, I'll say, yeah, the last 20 years. It's a bit more than that, of course, or about 20 years. We'll see. It depends on what they'll do next, actually. Um, but I'm interested. I hope personally that they choose somebody we don't really know about. Who's, I think, one of the most important things for the makers is that it probably should be a Brit. Like, I'm pretty sure there's certain requirements for any actor to be when it comes to playing James Bond, and you're looking for that person. I know there's that person I said at the beginning who is at the top of the list. There's a couple more. There was a long time that Aaron Taylor Johnson was going to be considered, but I think, just like the other contenders, a lot of them are just aging out of that role at this point. So I'm interested personally in what's going to happen next. I hope you are too, by the way, because this is such a character, a staple of the 21st, of the, yeah, both the 21st century and the 20th century, as he's been created so long ago, but still an interesting kind of trope of a person, of a man, the with a lot of problematic stuff in there. Uh, all of a sudden, this turned into a therapy session. I did, but yeah, maybe they can do something interesting. Also, I have an idea for something interesting to happen, but that would involve something maybe not everybody would like when it comes to Bond. And I'll just tease you guys for a little. Maybe for the Bond name to move on, it needs to not stay so one side in case of gender. That's my little tease right there. Okay, guys, thank you so much. If you followed all the way through with this episode of the FWX podcast. Before I go, you can like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel, and that will really help out. And that will make the podcast in this video become more available to people who like this kind of content. When I'm talking about something major, especially a big franchise like James Bond, who which has a lot of potential going forward, as they can start back from the very first point. It would be easy for them to just kind of do something similar, but not completely the same. And I love talking about stuff like this, franchises, genres, characters. Talk a lot about stories as well, world building, character stuff. Talk a lot about what is happening now as well. You can check those out on the podcast and on the channel. And then finally, you can also share this with friends and family, your colleagues at your work, or maybe just here online as well. And you can also comment away in a comment section down below as well. And I do really advise you guys to do that in a friendly and kind and polite way. And then finally, this has been it. I've been Frederik for the FWX podcast, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode. See ya.